to, do you know how to remove that? Okay, how do we do that, German? Okay, we started. Let me put it here. I'm going to put it to 25 minutes. Perfect. Okay, welcome all of you. Just a minute. Can we try to? Can we try to? We'll try to. Junior, we are starting. Huh?
Okay.
We are starting, guys. Huh?
Let's start.
Okay, welcome to the Structural Reform and Economic Growth session. Just a small announcement. One paper is going to be pulled from the next session to this one, which means that we are going to finish 30 minutes earlier. We have 3 papers that we are looking forward in this session. The first paper is by Tatiana Kirsanova, University of Glasgow, Searching for Flexibility, the Effects of Thatcher on UK Housing and Labour Markets. Tatiana, you've got 25 minutes. Also.
Yeah, thank you very much for invitation. This is also a special present for Junior. In a way, these are the projects which distract me for working together. So, this is a joint work with a PhD student, but it turned out a little bit, turned out to be a big research program. So what is it all about is that we were interested, I'm from UK, so in the UK there is a big problem of housing market. So there is a shortage of houses, everyone blames Margaret Thatcher, everyone says, you know, we need to do more, no one ever does. So there is also, of course, labor markets, and labor markets are not as good as, say, not as flexible as that in the United States, but probably more flexible than in Europe. But nevertheless, so this interaction between housing and labor market has always been a very hot topic of debate in the UK. And so we just thought we want to investigate how these things work. And I'm not a kind of theoretical or I wouldn't call myself as an applied econometrician. I do Bayesian estimation from time to time, trying to kind of get some empirical evidence on transmission mechanisms of interest. And here we wanted to build a model which would highlight or shed at least some light on interaction between housing market and the labor market, specifically wanted to use data in the United Kingdom and to see whether it can explain us what happens in the UK. But then when we got the data, and we wanted specifically the model which we can use using standard time series. So that brought us to representative agent models. You may have better ideas, or you may give me a lot of advice what I should be really doing, but we ended up with a particular model, which now with you, I'll show you what it shows. And then if you build the model, if you estimate the model, you want to think about whether it makes any sense. So if it would be UK, if it would be US, and me being, say, monetary economist, I would immediately check what happens during the Volcker disinflation. What does it tell us? Does it fit stylized facts? There are some stylized facts for UK, but I'm not entirely sure that they are as robust as the US one. So for us, it would be just generally interesting, say, to establish stylized facts, or some of them. For example, again, when you start talking about UK politics, it all boils down to Margaret Thatcher, because she did do something. After her, there was a lot of talking, but nobody actually did anything, none of the parties. So, and Margaret Thatcher, so an obvious validation test for this model would be to look at the times of Margaret Thatcher. So what did she do? She, she killed trade unions, so labor market reforms. Not only trade unions, there were some other aspects of those reforms which I wouldn't be touching, but labor market reforms, then particularly trade unions. Then a lot of things happened on the housing side, whether intentionally or not. Basically what happened, right to buy big privatization, program started in 1980s. So social housing, which was built after the Second World War, was privatized at a very high rate. And the local authorities housing, they stopped building. So basically it was a collapse of social housing construction. Very notable, I will show you. Also, there was a very big step on the monetary side. There was a financial liberalization, and as everywhere in the world, change in monetary paradigm. So we come to the Great Moderation in the 1980s, they started to change monetary policy. So we built a model which combines elements of all three markets. And the model is where I'll say from the very beginning, the model is extremely simple. And it doesn't capture many things. It horribly doesn't capture many things which you might think it should capture. However, it is what it is. I'll show you what it shows. And maybe in the future, we can have a better idea how to improve on it. So basically, I'm not going to go through the literature. I'll just tell you in a very rough terms. So it combines search and matching in the labor market with search and matching in the housing market with some monetary aspects and monetary policy. So if I say the key modeling references, it's not necessarily that we follow them directly, but they are in the pool of those references. So labor DSG part, estimation and theory, Lubick has a number of papers where he basically not only uses those models, he estimates them. So we we're looking how he did such things. On the housing part, there are a number of literature now which combines search and matching, but the one which we used most is Head, Lloyd, Ellis and Son of 2014 American Economic Review, I believe. You'll see some elements of that, but I'm not going to show you models because I don't have time and I just do hand waving as usual. Right, so what we have in so I want very, very rough idea of the model. So on there is output goods sector with the production general output goods, the standard one, search and matching happened there, pretty standard model. Housing sector, so there is a houses being constructed, so there are some developers which sell houses, so there is a new construction going on, but otherwise houses are being sold and being bought and people move between houses. I'll show it in a second. Then population is representative agent. So risk sharing on the side of households. So each household will have employed and unemployed, and it will have homeowners and searching buyers and permanent renters. So that's an obvious drawback of those models, but I don't know how to do it otherwise if I want to work with time series. So, so direct analogy is you're matching with your job on the labor market, or you're matching with a new house on the housing market. So construction developers produce new vacant housing units, and there's some land thing which can be developed into the land suitable for construction. These are all minor things. It could be elaborated in a bigger model, but that's more or less what we have. So perfect risk sharing within the household, and their budget constraint income comes from labor wages, unemployment benefits, and also housing sales, and they spend money on consumption, they pay lump sum taxes, so the fiscal side, believe it or not, is not there. And the housing costs and investments, so maintenance, so renters, so homeowners pay maintenance all the time, and renters pay rent, and also they buy houses, and they're complete financial markets. So what basically happens here, there are no first-time buyers. All households basically have houses, and there is no credit constraints. So you have a house, and then you decide, you kind of get a signal. You get a signal that you don't like your house anymore. Whether this is related to some job or not, we can discuss, but you get a signal. At that point, you take your house, put it on the market, get yourself into the rented accommodation, or you may rent it from yourself, and start searching for a new house. And then you find a new house and you match, and that's how the thing's going on. There are also permanent renters, which prefer not to buy houses, just rent. And there are shocks on them, so there are, the number of them can fluctuate. And but they are part of this economy. On the labor market, the things are pretty standard, so you also can lose your job with some separation rate, and then you start searching, and you can match with a new job. Okay, so what I want to show on this screen for housing and labor is just to remind you how, does it work? I don't know. How the matching looks like. So you say that new matches on the labor market is a function between unemployed and vacancies, and there is a tightness in the labor market, which is determined as vacancies divided by unemployment. And what happens with the flow of people in this market is this is a labor, and this labor is getting separation from the previous period, and new matches come in, so people find jobs, and some fraction of vacancies is being filled, and therefore the labor may go up. So it may go down, employed people, or it may go up, depending on this. The same thing happens in the housing market. So the matching will be matching efficiency. These are searching buyers, and these are S is empty houses, or houses for sale, not houses for sales. Empty or not, we can talk about it. Houses for sales. And there is also tightness. We can define these B over S, and there might be a typo here, I don't know. It's probably... Yeah, I don't know what's written here, sorry, because I think I did some adjustment, but probably with typo, because so it's, anyway, so buyers to sellers, that's the idea. And here is N is a number of homeowners. Again, they were gonna get separation from the previous house, and then they get a match, so some buyers will match with a new house, and that will increase the number of homeowners. I mean, these models, they are all slightly different in the literature, depending on what happens in which period, whether you have a delay between finding a job next period, or whether you have a delay in finding a house next period. So we did some adjustments for us. There are some details, but generally we are working with quarterly data, and we are well aware how frequently people find houses or find jobs in the UK. So we made some adjustments for that, and timing, well, I can give you details when we need it. Now, on the monetary side, unfortunately, we cannot introduce borrowing constraint. What we would need to do is, in principle, we would need to get first-time buyers, we would need to get the mortgage market, we would need to get some matching with a probably mortgage advisor or whatever. We could, in principle, but that was not in the plans, and we just use these two models on housing and labor to combine. We combine them, and we assume that monetary policy maker actually conducts monetary policy using monetary policy rule, and it can be dovish and hawkish. That's where market switching comes in. So, okay, now we need to model interactions between these two markets. And we tried various things, but we converged to the following. So the market efficiency in the labor market has subscript C. Don't ask me how it happened. It's probably due to consumption, I don't know. But I mean, labor market has subscript C. So the matching on the labor market is a function of tightness in the housing market. And separation rate is a function of a tightness in the housing market, deviations of the matching from the steady state. Why? Well, the idea is the following, that if people lose jobs or find jobs, they might move the house, for example. And so that might happen, we don't know, we want to investigate. In principle, we do not necessarily impose sign on it, but we checked the sign is gonna be like this. And what happens is that housing market may accelerate or slow down the labor market. So what happens, I just tell you now, that effect on matching will always dominate on the separation. So there will be effect on unemployment as a result. When we go to the housing market, so housing market has H in a subscript, we do the same thing. We say housing market might be affected by the labor market. You get a new job, you move your house. Or the one I should be saying that you can't afford to buy a house in London, so you don't really search for a job in London, something like that. So that's the story. And then remember that I don't have credit constraints in the model. So in principle, credit constraints can affect both markets, but pretty much more obvious that housing is relying on mortgages. So we try to play with various variables here, trying to understand what happens. One of people who work on these topics is John Muehlbauer, and people who he works with. They were suggesting that an important variable is loan to value ratio, which could be affecting the efficiency of matching, so kind of credit availability. We tried to play with this variable, it didn't work. What worked is real interest rate, which is also probably easy to explain, that if real interest rate is quite high, the matching efficiency falls. So there will be less matches. And so we were estimating these parameters. Kappa, eta, and zeta. And if I remember correctly, now let me say what happens on the monetary policy side. So on the monetary policy side, we assume pretty standard Taylor rule without much thinking, which depends interest rate volatility, deviation from the steady state interest rate is determined by inflation, dependent deviation from inflation target, well, vaguely, and change in output. So that's pretty much standard Taylor rule, which is used all over the places, and then we put it in the model. And we also do Markov switching on the volatility of shocks. because again, themes early on, at least for the US, showed it's quite important to have them if you want to deal with great inflation of 1970s. Yes, so these are the data we work with. Well, it turned out that when you write this model and you put all the parameters there, that was a revelation for me, I didn't know. There are these search and matching models operate very few parameters. And these few parameters, like, you know, they're very rigid. Some of them should be between 0 and 1, many of them. So lots of constraints on that. You also have a lot of data, which allow you, well, unless you have some other considerations, to pinpoint all those parameters. Very little of these parameters could be actually estimated unless you, violate all the empirical evidence which you have, which makes this model to estimate is very, very hard. And also, because we have two markets, and there are data on labor, and there are data on housing, and we managed to get the data. You don't see it from here, I don't see it from here either. I presume it is sometime end of whatever 60s, so that's 1980, I believe. So if it's 98, it's 1970, so it's from 1971 or something. So Margaret Thatcher came to power in 79. So we still have 10 years of who cares what happened there. So, and this is how British data look like, and output growth, unemployment, growth rate of real earnings, horribly volatile data, how hours of work, well, they didn't change much, but it's non-stationary clearly, growth rate of labor market tightness, so we don't want to impose any level, but we have an estimate of the growth rate of house price to rent ratio, growth rate of housing stock must be falling, growth rate of house sales, nominal interest rate, huge inflation relative at the same scale on inflation and interest rate. So that's how 1980s looked like. So they were always keeping interest rate low. So it's inflation rate, nominal interest rate, and that's home ownership rate. So Margaret Thatcher comes here, this is a big hike. So there is a very, well, it was growing anyway, but it was very, very big hike here. So, all right. So I will show you immediately what we got on the monetary policy, because I'm going to talk about, so I guess 5 minutes left, and I need to accelerate immediately. So it's quite interesting. So they started to manipulate M3 and so on. So that's where they started to change the monetary policy. And then it doesn't go down. So that's a probability of being hawkish. So these are they're completely dovish. Then they start going down. The description of this period is like they didn't know what they were doing. That's kind of contemporary, in particular in the second part. But then they have ERM collapse. And after ERM collapse, they introduced inflation target implicitly. And it went down and it stayed there. And you don't see here gray area, unfortunately. There are actually bright projector, but there are recession dates in the gray. I need to do something with these slides. So that's shock volatility, which picks me up the Great Recession. It picks me up the total mess since before the 1980s. So it all looks pretty reasonable, comparable with the United States, and too good to be true, but that's what I get. Now, interesting thing is immediately to look at historical variance decomposition, because I told you that the model is not perfect. It doesn't have many things in it. And so therefore, all important things are going to be attributed to some random shocks. So that starts in 79, Margaret Thatcher comes. 91, she loses election somewhere here. And what you have here is growth rate of house price to rent ratio. So first question which everyone asks, what determines house price? Because everyone will tell you interest rate through the mortgages channel, which we don't have, plus risk sharing. Even if we had it, or because of risk sharing, it probably is not going to affect anything. So I would argue that this pink thing is very much seen here, so it drives things down. And there is one important thing going on here. And this pink thing is bargain power. And this is bargain power, which means, which is usually correlated with real earnings. So therefore, people get more wage, more higher, they are more able, so drive house price down. So it's up. So I don't think it's unreasonable. Another thing, if you look at this next graph, which is growth rate of house sales, and you can immediately see, or at least what I think, that the greenish thing dominate. So greenish thing dominates is a shock to renters, to permanent renters. So that would be privatization. This would be, say, first-time buyers or something like that. So that's how our model would assign. I think it makes a lot of sense. So I go next. Now, what I do in the remaining like 3 minutes, or 2 minutes, sorry, I know we estimated those numbers. I'm not going to show it to you because it will cause risk. We don't know their values. We have no idea whether it should be big or not because it's kind of changes the speed. But how we can look at it? We can look at counterfactuals. What would happen? And we have 3 things. That's the most important one, which I want to tell you. I extract the workers' bargain power. It's a latent variable. Rise allows us to extract it, and we know she killed trade unions, so I expect to see a peak. I see the black peak here. So basically I say so that her killing trade unions is a shock, because there is no kind of mechanism for that, it's exogenous. So I remove this shock. This shock was negative here. So if I remove this shock, the red line would be. So that would be leading to much higher unemployment, house price to earning ratio, so it's affordability, inverse of affordability. Affordability would be lower. There's some effects on interest rate and on inflation. So next effect is end of housing construction. So the blue line, basically that's what housing construction was killed here. And so what would happen if they continue building? Very little effect on unemployment and big effect on house price to earning ratio, relatively big. It's about 10%, I guess, of affordability would improve. So again, reasonable effect. So then the last thing is right to buy. So basically what we say, okay, let's consider shock to renters, and we have no idea which shock to renters to include. We know that homeowners were rising like this, and we say, well, let it rise just slower. What would be effect? Well, the effect would be consistent with the previous trend. The effect would be not so much on unemployment, but some effect on affordability. Now, that's conclusions, so I'm getting to my conclusions. I say if I put everything together, 3 reports, I'm not putting monetary policy in it because I'm not per se interested in it, but estimating monetary policy was extremely important because it shapes other shocks. If I don't do it, I have different results. Well, not actually vastly different, but these are nicer. So the effect is big effect on unemployment, presumably because of trade unions. Well, there's some house price to earning ratio. So basically, if affordability, if she didn't do those reforms, affordability actually would be worse. So the red line. Well, she would have, if she didn't do those reforms, that inflation would be lower, and the nominal interest rate would be lower. So that's what we get. That's what we get. And so basically lower employment by 1 percentage point at the peak of unemployment 1984, and sustained reduction in housing affordability. So about 10% through 1980 to 85. So in a way, one can blame for the housing Thatcher for the housing market, but certainly not for the labor market. So this is it. The rest is appendix. Thank you very much, and we have what we have.
Few minutes for questions.
No questions. It's an exciting topic. Okay.
Can you say something about the welfare consequences of reform?
I can't. And the reason why I cannot is that I don't know how. We didn't put fiscal policy in it. And we would need to do that, and we would need to to kind of, that would give us the thing. But the interesting thing is that basically you ask, where all this money from privatization gone? The answer, they dissipated. Because they wanted, there are a lot of evidence, and we will probably be writing them, that they wanted to get this money from privatizations and build new houses. But when they kind of decided to look at it, it turned out that this money in the budget disappeared. There were no special things that they could take. And so that it was continue going as it was going. So in a way, it would be difficult to pinpoint the welfare consequences, but it's certainly interesting thing to do. And we're going to do that. The other thing which is on my mind is that when we model housing, we had to introduce chains. Like people start searching new house, still living in a house without putting it on the market. That happens, so we somehow adjusted for that. But we didn't adjust for jobs, search on the job. And it's not very difficult to do, at least we can check robustness, so it's kind of on the list of continue playing, what we continue playing with this model. So, but I don't think we're gonna do anything with credit constraints and things.
Thank you.
Online now.
Thank you, Tatiana. So online we have a question about matching houses production. What do you do with unsold houses? What is preventing heterogeneity of house producers? Could you give some details about house pricing, rent and buy?
You write a value function for buyers, for sellers, for the value of the house, and you have a bunch of these Bellman equations. And one of the key assumptions here that the homeowner is indifferent between renting the house or selling the house. So there are certain conditions which come out of it, which is maybe not very realistic. I mean, houses will be sold. If a house is not sold this period, it will be sold in another period or rented. So there will be, depending on the price, there will be always takers eventually. So that's the answer, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tatiana, for this wonderful talk.
I need a professional person to help me wear this. I'm going to try this. I've never worked in a call center before.